Audie Murphy received 24 decorations. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, and 3 citations for the Purple Heart. In fact, his life is such a vital part of the American way.
They weren't just Hollywood stars. Before the fame, these men had pulled real triggers, watched enemies fall, and seen their friends torn apart beside them. They weren't acting when they held a gun on screen. They had already learned how to use one in war, where hesitation meant death. The glamour was a mask. Behind it were scars, nightmares, and memories soaked in blood.
Shot off a boxcar.
And I have that one. It's right here, that wound.
These are 10 frightening stories of Golden Age stars who were trained killers that you'll wish you had known about sooner. Number 10. Audie Murphy. From boyish farmhand to war's most lethal soldier. Audie Murphy was only 19 when he became the most decorated American soldier of World War II. He looked like a boy, but he fought like a machine built for survival. In January 1945, during the Colmar Pocket in France, his unit was overrun by tanks and infantry. Murphy, already wounded, climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and manned its .50 caliber machine gun. For an hour, he fired at everything that moved, cutting down around 50 German soldiers. That single act earned him the Medal of Honor. It also left him with memories that would poison the rest of his life. His record was staggering. 33 confirmed kills, countless others unrecorded. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and foreign awards, all before his 20th birthday.
He had been awarded 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Silver Star medals, and from the French government, 2 Croix de Guerre with palm.
But medals don't erase the cost. The boy who once hunted rabbits to feed his siblings after his father left and his mother died young now carried nightmares that never left him. Hollywood turned him into a star after Life magazine put his face on its cover. James Cagney helped him land a screen test, and Murphy slipped into westerns and war movies with ease. Audiences loved him in To Hell and Back, where he played himself, recreating the same tank destroyer battle that had made him a legend. People said the film felt more real than any other war picture. It was because Murphy wasn't acting. He was reliving it. His stare, his posture, his cold steadiness in the face of danger came from experience, not training. Producers knew this and exploited it. They sold Murphy's war image relentlessly, often pushing him into roles that mirrored his battlefield experiences.
Red 9, 5 tanks attacking near Easter Junction. Coordinates 418603. Situation urgent.
He was a guaranteed draw, but he was also underpaid compared to other leading men. He never achieved the same financial security as stars who had never seen a day of combat. His trauma made him bankable, but Hollywood didn't protect him from the personal wreckage that followed. Directors noted how convincing he was on screen, but many also whispered it was because he was still trapped in that war. But the same experiences that made him believable also broke him.
I'll telephone Korean and make all the necessary arrangements.
Murphy slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He woke drenched in sweat, convinced Germans were breaking down his door. One night, he pressed a gun against his wife during a nightmare, not knowing who she was. He gambled heavily, lost fortunes, and fought depression so deep he locked himself away for days. On set, his temper was quick, and co-stars quietly noted he carried the weight of something darker than fame. His success in Hollywood came from the truth written on his face.
Guess we all want to quit sometimes. It's kind of hard not to take the easy way out when it's right there in front of you.
Why do we talk of bad things?
A man who had seen too much, but that same truth destroyed him off-screen. He had survived the battlefield, but in Hollywood, he was still 19 years old, trapped on that burning tank destroyer, fighting an enemy that never stopped chasing him. Number 9, Sterling Hayden. From smuggling guns to Hollywood leading man. Sterling Hayden was 6'5", broad-shouldered, and looked like he was built for Hollywood.
Of course, and so are the track detectives who covered them from the car to the office and back.
But before he ever stood in front of a camera, He was smuggling rifles through Nazi-controlled waters, living a life far more dangerous than anything in a script. In 1944, under the code name John Hamilton, Hayden worked for the OSS, the wartime agency that later became the CIA. His missions were brutal. Hayden admitted later that fear was his constant companion. In his memoir, Wanderer, he wrote about watching men die, about the compromises he made, and about never being sure whether what he was doing was right.
I want a guy like you, someone who's absolutely dependable, who knows he's being well paid to take a risk and won't squawk if the going gets rough.
Only that he had no choice. He earned the Silver Star and even a decoration from Marshal Tito, but he carried scars medals could not hide. Hollywood gave him stardom after the war. His size, voice, and intensity made him perfect for film noir and westerns.
Yes, so it is. And tonight, especially tonight, I am in no mood for the Brotherhood of Man. Do you mind?
Directors like John Huston said Hayden's presence was different from other actors. It came from real nights spent whispering orders in the dark, knowing a mistake would mean death. On screen, that intensity made him magnetic.
7th race starts about 4:30 if you want to catch it on the radio. I'll be back here about 7 o'clock.
Off screen, it left him unsettled. He drank heavily, fought with studios, and walked away from Hollywood repeatedly, saying acting felt empty compared to war. The scars cut deeper. In the late 1940s, Hayden briefly joined the Communist Party. When the Red Scare hit, he was dragged before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Pressured by fear and guilt, he named names of people he had once stood beside. For the rest of his life, he carried shame over it, calling it the most cowardly act he had ever done. His drinking grew worse. He became openly bitter about Hollywood, describing the studio system as a prison. He would take roles, disappear, return broke, and do it all again.
No war is anybody's war.
I'm not talking about anybody. How do we stay out?
The war had made him believable on screen, but it also made him restless, angry, and self-destructive. Number 8. Richard Todd, the paratrooper actor who helped seize D-Day's crucial bridge. Only a few knew Richard had once jumped into the most dangerous corner of Normandy to help decide the success or failure of D-Day itself. Richard achieved this before he became a familiar face in post-war British films. The future screen star was not just telling stories of war on film, he had lived through one of the invasion's most pivotal battles. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, Todd was a young lieutenant in Britain's 7th Parachute Battalion, part of the 6th Airborne Division. His mission was to land near Pegasus Bridge, a small but vital crossing over the Caen Canal.
230. 230.
If German forces brought tanks across that bridge, they could have slammed into the Allied troops landing at nearby Sword Beach and possibly crushed the invasion's eastern flank. The plan was high risk. British glider troops under Major John Howard had landed minutes before midnight in a daring assault to seize the bridge. Todd's paratroopers were supposed to drop in shortly after to reinforce them. But bad weather, heavy German anti-aircraft fire, and strong winds scattered the paratroopers across the countryside. Many landed in flooded fields or tangled hedgerows, some never making it to the fight. Todd was one of the lucky few to hit the ground close to the intended drop zone near Ranville. Shaking off the impact, he quickly gathered a handful of his scattered men and led them on a tense 2-mile trek through enemy-occupied fields toward the sound of gunfire at the bridge. Every ditch could hide an enemy patrol, and every flare in the night sky risked exposing them.
Got relatively formidable defensive positions. They've got machine gun nests on both bridges. On one bridge, they've got an anti-tank gun.
When Todd finally reached Pegasus Bridge, he linked up with Howard's exhausted but determined force, still under attack from German troops trying to retake the crossing. Todd's platoon dug in, joining the fight to hold the bridge through repeated counterattacks, including probes by German armor. Outnumbered and short on heavy weapons, the defenders held out until British forces advancing inland from the beaches finally arrived to secure the position by midday. Todd was promoted to captain just days later and went on to serve through the brutal battles in Normandy that followed. But the stand at Pegasus Bridge remained the defining moment of his military career. After the war, Todd returned quietly to acting, first on the stage and then in films. His combat experience gave his performances in war movies like The Dam Busters and Yangtze Incident a grounded, unforced realism. The connection became almost uncanny when, in 1962, Todd was cast in The Longest Day to portray none other than Major John Howard, the very officer he had fought alongside at Pegasus Bridge. For Todd, revisiting that night on camera stirred memories he rarely spoke about. His clipped, steady delivery and unflashy presence on screen carried the weight of someone who had faced real combat, not stage drama. But while Todd fought on the ground in France, the next star waged war from the clouds, a beloved American actor whose steady voice once commanded bombers on missions where entire crews rarely came home. Number 7. James Stewart, the Hollywood icon who rained fire from the skies. Audiences saw James Stewart as the shy, soft-spoken man in It's a Wonderful Life, the kind of neighbor who'd help you fix a fence. What they didn't see, what he rarely spoke about, was the man sitting in the cockpit of a B-24 Liberator, giving the order to unleash tons of bombs on German cities. The same steady voice that once charmed crowds now sent young crews into skies they often wouldn't return from. Stewart's journey into that world of fire didn't start with the Army drafting him. He went after it. Already a skilled pilot before the war, he left behind his Hollywood career, despite studio protests, and enlisted as a private in March 1941, months before Pearl Harbor. Tall and lean, he barely passed the military's weight requirement, but pushed through training, mastering heavy bombers at a time when most thought he'd be more useful making morale films. The Army Air Forces tried to keep him stateside as a trainer and poster boy. Stewart refused. He wanted combat. He kept pressing until he got posted to England in late 1943, joining the 445th Bombardment Group of the 8th Air Force. By then, the air war over Europe was among the deadliest assignments in the Allied campaign.
And they've got to land one after the other in synchronized order.
Stewart didn't just fly, he led. He climbed to operations officer and then squadron commander, often flying in the lead position where mistakes could cost entire formations. Between October 1943 and March 1944, he officially logged 20 combat missions. Biographers suggest as many as 25. These weren't simple flights. They were long, freezing hauls deep into German territory, often through storms of flak and swarms of enemy fighters. Crews watched planes next to them explode or spiral down in flames, but Stewart's voice on the intercom stayed calm, issuing course corrections and timing bomb runs with icy precision. For that composure under fire, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross with an oak leaf cluster, the Air Medal with 3 clusters, and France's Croix de Guerre. He ended the war as a full colonel and later rose in the Air Force Reserve to Brigadier General, the highest rank reached by any major Hollywood star. But the war left a mark. The press celebrated his heroism, but it didn't talk about the weight he carried, the knowledge that the bombs he ordered killed not just soldiers, but countless civilians. Friends said that the shadow stayed with him. Directors noticed it too. Anthony Mann, who cast him in his darker post-war westerns, said Stewart's performances carried a tension you can't rehearse. The war hardened Stewart's screen presence. Gone was the purely idealistic everyman. His later roles in Rear Window and Vertigo carried an edge, a quiet, haunted steeliness that audiences felt even if they didn't know why. Yet the skies were not the only killing ground for Hollywood's future legends. The next man faced death in a cramped glass turret at the back of a bomber, watching friends vanish in flames as enemy fighters came straight for him. Number 6. Charles Bronson, the silent tail gunner who turned survival into steel. Before he became the stone-faced avenger of Death Wish, or the unflinching harmonica in Once Upon a Time in the West, Charles Bronson carried a different kind of weapon. He was locked in the glass bubble at the back of a B-29 bomber, bracing for enemy fighters, and firing .50 caliber rounds in desperate duels where survival came down to seconds and luck. That unshakable calm on screen came from real combat. Born Charles Bukinski in 1921 to a poor coal mining family in Pennsylvania, he knew hardship early. Drafted in 1943, he joined the Army Air Forces and was assigned as a tail gunner, the most exposed and dangerous position on a heavy bomber. Cramped in a freezing turret with only plexiglass between him and the sky, he watched for enemy aircraft streaking in from behind, knowing they often targeted the tail first. Bronson flew 25 missions over Europe with the 760th Flexible Gunnery Squadron. Each mission meant climbing into the thin, frigid air at 25,000 feet, where temperatures could freeze fingers to the guns. He had to scan the skies constantly for tiny specks that could suddenly become enemy fighters, like the fast and deadly Messerschmitts.
Or if the pilot or co-pilot were hit.
A tail gunner's life expectancy was often counted in missions, not months. Many of his fellow crewmen never returned. The danger was relentless. Flak shells tearing through bomber formations, fighters diving out of the clouds, engines flaming out mid-air. His calm under fire earned respect from his squad mates, but the missions took a toll. He saw aircraft around him disintegrate in seconds, and men he had shared meals with vanish into smoke and debris. When the war ended, Bronson returned home with no money and little direction. He worked in the mines again, then used the GI Bill to study art in Philadelphia, which led him into acting. In Hollywood, he changed his name to Bronson and gradually earned roles that suited his tough, quiet demeanor.
I think she's gonna take after you.
You should get back. You're gonna miss the best part.
The best part is here.
Directors like Sergio Leone saw something in him that couldn't be faked, the weight of real combat experience. That wartime intensity shaped his characters. The steady stare, the clipped lines, the sense that he wasn't acting but remembering, these traits came from the tail turret's lonely vigil. As film critic Roger Ebert once said, Bronson didn't play the tough man, he simply embodied it. The hardships of poverty and the life-and-death tension of air combat gave his performances a gravity that audiences could sense. Number 5, Neville Brand, the battle-hardened sergeant who turned real war into real menace. Popularly known as Hollywood's go-to villain, Neville Brand was something far deadlier than any gangster he played on screen. In World War II, he was a frontline infantryman who charged machine gun nests, dragged wounded comrades to safety under fire, and bled in Europe's deadliest battles. The menace audiences later saw in his eyes wasn't an act. It came from real foxholes.
This is Al Capone.
I just knocked over your new brewery down at the stockyards.
What?
Look out your window at exactly 11 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Brand's war began years before the cameras found him. Born in 1921 in Kewanee, Illinois, to a railroad worker and a struggling mother, he joined the Illinois National Guard in 1939, just to earn a paycheck. By March 1941, he was in the regular army, training at Camp Forest. When D-Day came, he went ashore with the 331st Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Thunderbolt Division, pushing through the Normandy hedgerows where German machine gunners hid just yards away. The fighting only grew worse. His unit slogged through the failed push at Market Garden, then into the Hurtgen Forest, a nightmare of mud, freezing rain, and hidden snipers. By December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Brand was a staff sergeant leading a squad of exhausted, under-equipped men in the snow-choked Ardennes. When German forces tried to break through, he didn't just hold the line, he led counterattacks, at one point pushing a machine gun position forward under heavy fire, an act that earned him the Silver Star for gallantry. A piece of shrapnel tore into him in the fighting, adding a Purple Heart to his uniform, but he refused to quit. By the time the war ended, Brand had fought across France, Belgium, and into Germany. His ribbon bar included the Silver Star, Purple Heart, Good Conduct Medal, American Defense Service Medal, the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal with battle stars, and the World War II Victory Medal. Some press later hyped him as one of the most decorated U.S. soldiers of the war. Brand downplayed it, saying he had only done what any soldier in his position had to do. Discharged in October 1945, he might have gone back to working rail yards like his father, but the GI Bill opened a different door. He studied acting at the Pasadena Playhouse, where his rough voice, broad frame, and unshakable stare quickly made him a natural for tough guy roles. As Al Capone in The Untouchables, or the brutal inmates he played in Riot in Cell Block 11, and Stalag 17, there was an authenticity to his menace that directors recognized immediately. That authenticity came from experience. Brand had seen real combat at close quarters, and the tension, the edge, the haunted look, it wasn't something a drama class could teach. He later struggled with drinking, a shadow from the war years, but on screen, the scars gave his characters a lived-in danger that audiences and critics couldn't ignore. Yet not all future stars entered the war as fighters. The next man went in as a medic to save lives, only to learn that sometimes survival meant dropping the bandages and pulling the trigger. Number 4. Telly Savalas, the medic who learned to kill under fire. What would you do if you were sent to a battlefield to save lives, only to discover that sometimes the only way to save them was to kill? That was the harsh reality for one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Before the world knew him as the smooth-talking, lollipop-spinning Kojak, Telly Savalas was a young Army medic launched into the Pacific's deadliest island battles, where bandages often gave way to bullets.
You know, Maria, we put the lid on Audie being murdered.
Yeah, you mentioned that on the phone.
It's important.
Sure, anything.
Born in 1922 in Garden City, Long Island, to Greek immigrant parents, Aristoteles Telly Savalas joined the U.S. Army in 1941. He was trained as a medic with the 12th Medical Training Battalion, expecting to treat the wounded far from the front. But in late 1944, as General Douglas MacArthur's forces fought to retake the Philippines, Savalas and his unit were pushed forward into the brutal Leyte campaign, one of the Pacific's bloodiest island battles. On Leyte, there was no safe rear line. Japanese forces hid in the dense jungle, snipers picked off medics, and kamikaze pilots strafed U.S. positions. Medics often had to crawl through gunfire to drag out the wounded.
Move the men down slowly! Mitchell, you pick up Grace's PAR and head this way!
When Japanese troops charged their lines, they had no choice but to drop the bandages and grab a rifle. Savalas experienced that flip firsthand. One moment, patching a torn artery, the next fighting off an attacker to keep his patient alive. In October 1944, shrapnel from an enemy mortar tore through his thigh, ending his combat service and earning him a Purple Heart. He returned home in 1945, carrying not just the scar, but the memory of the shift from saving lives to pulling the trigger. After the war, Savalas studied psychology at Columbia University. A professor noticed his rich voice and suggested broadcasting, which led him into radio, then acting. By the time he appeared in Robert Aldrich's 1967 war classic The Dirty Dozen, as the menacing Archer Maggot, he didn't have to fake the hard-edged authority of a soldier who had seen combat. Directors often said his orders on screen carried the weight of a man who had once given them when lives were at stake. That authenticity followed him into his most famous role as Detective Kojak. The trademark bald head, originally a wartime shave he kept, gave him a distinct look, and the disarming "Who loves you, baby?" softened the steel in his eyes. Number 3. Clark Gable, Hollywood's king who became a combat gunner. Clark Gable was called the King of Hollywood, but by 1942, he was a man shattered.
Please don't go on with this. Leave us some dignity to remember out of our marriage. Spare us this land.
That January, his wife Carol Lombard was killed in a plane crash while returning from a war bond drive. The loss devastated him. Friends said he drank heavily, chain-smoked, and seemed to stop caring whether he lived or died. So when the U.S. entered the war, Gable didn't just enlist for duty. He enlisted to escape his grief, telling some close friends that combat didn't scare him.
We're in the graduate school of gunnery now, learning it in combat, trying to put it on the film.
Death almost felt welcome. At 41, far older than most recruits, Gable joined the Army Air Forces and pushed through gunnery training. By 1943, he was in England, flying with the 351st Bomb Group. His assignment was to film bombing missions for a training movie. But this wasn't safe propaganda work. He went up in B-17 bombers under real fire, often standing at the waist gunner's exposed position. On one mission over Germany's Ruhr Valley, flak ripped through the fuselage and enemy fighters fired rounds that missed him by inches. He kept filming, but the brush with death rattled even him. Word of his close calls reached President Roosevelt, who feared losing America's most famous star, and quietly pushed for Gable to return home. By the fall of 1943, he had earned the Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross, but his service left scars. He came back in 1944 looking older, heavier, and less like the dashing romantic lead fans remembered. The studio still billed him as Hollywood royalty, but Gable was different. The war had drained him. He was more serious, more withdrawn, and often turned to drinking when memories surfaced. Nightmares and anxiety followed him, though no one in that era called it PTSD. Gable also carried guilt. He had risked his life, but unlike the young men who kept flying endless missions, he was ordered home early because of his celebrity. He never felt fully comfortable with the protection that fame gave him. Meanwhile, Hollywood had changed. Younger actors like Gregory Peck and Montgomery Clift were rising, and the romantic, light-hearted roles that once defined Gable no longer fit. After the war, he gravitated toward parts with a harder edge. Submarine commanders, tough leaders, men marked by experience.
Nice dive, 300 feet, all ahead full. There's a destroyer coming in fast.
These weren't just roles. They reflected the man he had become. Though he remarried twice, Gable never fully recovered from Lombard's death. Friends said he often spoke of her even decades later. The war gave him a new layer of respect as both a soldier and a star, but it also left him lonelier, angrier, and more fragile than the public ever saw. When audiences watched Clark Gable on screen after 1944, they still saw the king of Hollywood. What they didn't see was the widower who had stared death in the face at 25,000 feet and returned home carrying wounds no medal or studio gloss could ever heal. Number 2, Charles Durning, the D-Day survivor who escaped death 3 times.
We learned this week the actor Charles Durning died in New York on Monday.
Some Golden Age stars carried secrets darker than any role they ever played. Among them was a young soldier who, before he became beloved actor Charles Durning, cheated death not once, but 3 separate times during the Second World War on Omaha Beach, in a mine-scarred field.
He was 21 years old on D-Day when he was in the first wave to hit Omaha Beach.
And as a captured prisoner awaiting execution. Durning was only 21 when he landed with the first wave of the 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, on June 6, 1944. The landing craft's ramp dropped into waist-deep water under direct fire. His company of about 200 men was cut down within minutes by German machine guns from the bluffs above. Durning clawed forward through barbed wire and bodies, reportedly killing several enemy gunners to keep his squad moving. By the time the beach was secured, he was one of the few still standing from his entire company. Just 6 days later, while advancing inland through the hedgerows west of Omaha, a landmine tore into his legs, earning him his first Purple Heart and months in a British hospital. Most soldiers would have taken the discharge. Durning refused. Against medical orders, he returned to his unit to fight through the brutal slog across France and into Germany. In December 1944, the Germans launched their last great offensive, the Battle of the Bulge.
Later, he was bayoneted by a German soldier before killing him with a rock.
Durning's unit was overrun in the Ardennes snow. Captured near the Sour River, he was locked in a barn with other prisoners. With his hands bound and the guards outside, he waited for execution at dawn. When one guard nodded off, Durning made his move, slipping his bonds, killing the sentry in the struggle, and trekking through freezing terrain until he reached American lines. That escape later earned him the Silver Star for valor. He went back into action, fighting in desperate close-quarters engagements that left him with 2 more Purple Hearts, one for bayonet wounds in the woods, another for shrapnel during the final push across the Rhine. By war's end, he had 14 combat wounds and a permanent limp, but had survived what few could. Discharged in 1946 as a staff sergeant, Durning used the GI Bill to study acting. On stage and screen, Dog Day Afternoon, To Be or Not to Be, and Tootsie, he brought an understated intensity drawn from real experience.
Charles Durning appeared in more than 100 movies in a career that started in 1962.
Yet the final story belongs to a man whose ordeal was so raw and brutal, it followed him into every role he ever played. A Marine sniper who crawled through the jungle with a deadened leg, refusing to surrender as enemy guns closed in. Number 1. Lee Marvin, the sniper who crawled away from death. Lee Marvin once crawled through the jungle of Saipan with a paralyzed leg, machine gun fire tearing the ground around him, inching toward safety as enemy troops closed in.
With a national effort like that, the motion picture companies kind of join in and say, yes, now we can utilize.
An unthinkable ordeal that would later shape the cold stare that made him one of Hollywood's most menacing screen legends. He enlisted in August 1942 at the age of 23. He had no special background, just a working-class kid from the Bronx who had drifted through odd jobs. Boot camp at San Diego toughened him fast, and he qualified as a scout sniper at Camp Pendleton. He learned the hard skills, estimating distance, adjusting for wind, and holding his breath for a steady shot. Those lessons would matter on the islands of the Central Pacific, where the fighting was close, brutal, and gave little room for error. His unit, Company 1, 3rd Battalion, 24th Marines, saw action on Tarawa and Kwajalein before the battle that nearly killed him, Saipan, in June 1944. The invasion was supposed to be quick, but the Japanese fought from caves, pillboxes, and cane fields. Civilians, trapped between armies, often leapt from cliffs to their deaths. Marvin's battalion lost most of its men in the first few days, fighting ridge by ridge, house by house. His job as a sniper was to take out enemy officers and machine gun crews before they could cut down advancing Marines. But during a push-up on the slopes of Mount Topocho, a hidden Japanese gunner opened fire. A burst of machine gun rounds ripped into Marvin's thigh, severing his sciatic nerve. His leg went dead instantly. Under fire, he dragged himself with his elbows through coral and brush until fellow Marines pulled him to safety. That wound ended his combat days. He spent a year in military hospitals and was discharged in September 1944 with a Purple Heart and a permanent limp. Back home, Marvin drifted through odd jobs before stumbling into acting. His rough look, gravelly voice, and the limp he never lost made him a natural fit for hard-edged roles. Directors like John Borman and Sam Fuller, both veterans themselves, knew Marvin's intensity was real. He once said, "Face a machine gun, then a bayonet charge, and afterward, the rest is small potatoes." The trauma never left him, but he turned it into a strength on screen, giving his characters the weary menace of a man who had already been to hell and made it back. These stars were not just actors playing soldiers. They were soldiers who had faced war's darkest truths and carried that weight into Hollywood. Their fame could never erase the horrors they endured. It only gave them a stage to show the world a glimpse of the cost of survival. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories where history and Hollywood collide. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.